And a few years ago, there was an incident whereby I asked for some support around my hearing loss in a customer setting, and my needs weren't met. The encounter was a particularly frustrating one because it was so clear that the person dealing with me simply didn't have a clue how to meet my needs. They didn't understand what being disabled meant.
I think sometimes there can be a bit of a lack of awareness about what support is available from an employer's perspective, and also what support a training provider can offer. And so, making providers and employers aware of additional support needs at the earliest opportunity is key to getting that support.
And I think it's about being prepared to be flexible and maybe do things differently to what you are doing at the moment.
Hello and welcome to the 6th episode of the Learning Collab, where we collaborate with industry experts and experienced practitioners to bring you hints, tips and advice from the world of post-16 education to help improve learner experiences and outcomes. I'm Ros Protheroe, Training Director of Panda Education Training, and today we're exploring a really important topic, which is inclusion in apprenticeships. Now, why does this topic matter? Well, the employment rate for disabled people in Wales was 50.9% as of June 2024. Now, this compares to a rate of 81.6% for non-disabled people, and that leaves an employment gap of 30%. So we'll be looking at inclusion from two perspectives today. One is how employers can promote inclusion, and the other is from an assessor's point of view. How can assessors be more inclusive in their practice?
Thank you, Ros. Looking forward to this. So I'm Anne Reardon-James. I'm the Learning Advisor for Panda Education and Training. I've always been passionate about inclusive practice, so this episode is very close to my heart. We're very pleased to welcome our two collaborators to today's episode. So we've got Charlotte Dando, Senior Head of Learner Journey and Inclusive Learning at Cardiff Vale College. Welcome, welcome. And Nicola Ankin, Disability Consultant and Founder of Inexclusion.
Welcome both. Great to have you here today. So let's start off with Charlotte. Charlotte, we've worked together in past lives, but can you tell us a little bit about your background and your journey to your current role at Cardiff and Vale?
Yes. So my journey started in the charity sector, where I provided creative movement education programs for people with profound and multiple learning difficulties. And that's where my passion for both inclusion and education really began. From there, I moved into work-based learning. I was in the work-based learning sector for 10 years, starting as a tutor and assessor, and then progressing into a range of management roles, each with a focus on learning support and inclusion. I, 2 years ago, moved across to Cardiff and Vale College, where I'm now Senior Head of Department for Learner Journey and Inclusive Learning. I'm also the college's statutory elenco, and as part of my role, I oversee the college's provision for inclusive learning and additional learning needs support, wellbeing and skills, safeguarding, learner voice and student union.
That's a small role there, but
Just a small remit.
keeps you busy. But, we've known each other a long time, haven't we, Charlotte? And, I think it's fair to say you're really passionate about inclusion. And that's why we wanted you on the podcast today. So welcome and thank you. And Nicola, how did you arrive where you are today at launching your own business?
Hello everyone, lovely to be with you today. So I was diagnosed at the age of 4 with a severe hearing loss following a childhood illness. So I've had a lifelong hidden disability and have navigated the world somewhat successfully with this hearing loss. Professionally, my main career was supporting young people with additional learning needs on the transition from mainstream school into further higher education, training and employment. And this involved advocating on behalf of my clients and for their needs, influencing organisations like education and training providers, plus employers to sometimes change their practices to be able to accommodate my clients' needs. I was very passionate about this job and I absolutely loved it. I was very happy in this position for about 20 years before taking redundancy for personal reasons. As someone with a disability, I face daily barriers around access and inclusion. And a few years ago, there was an incident whereby I asked for some support around my hearing loss in a customer setting, and my needs weren't met. The encounter was a particularly frustrating one because it was so clear that the person dealing with me simply didn't have a clue how to meet my needs. They didn't understand what being disabled meant, and they weren't even aware of their obligation under the law to make reasonable adjustments for me. And so I decided I was going to do something about it. And so that's when Inexclusion was born. And I've set up a business offering disability awareness training and consultancy services to all types of organisations.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nicola. It's really interesting to see how you came to opening Inexclusion. Brilliant. So look, the reason we're here today, let's talk about what disability and additional learning needs are within the context of apprenticeships, and what are the common barriers faced by learners and employers. Charlotte?
So I think when talking about the topic of additional learning needs in the context of apprenticeships, it's important to note that not everyone that has a disability will have an additional learning need. So somebody only has an additional learning need if they require something that's different from or additional to what would be generally available to everybody else. And so we should really be aiming to meet most people's needs through our usual practice and through reasonable adjustments, as Nicola said, under the Equality Act. And then for those that need something additional to or different, that is when we would look at additional learning provision that might be required that targets and ensures that they can access their curriculum and provision.
Yeah, that's something that we try to get across in the way we train trainers at Panda. Is it's not just making special resources for the people who need it. It's making sure that learning is for everyone and those resources meet everyone's needs. But then if you have to differentiate a little bit extra where it's needed, then that's fine. But Anne, as a trainer and assessor, what does inclusion mean to you? You know, is it what I just said about Panda, or is it something different?
I agree with all of that. And I like what you said, Charlotte, about it's the inclusion point, isn't it? About, I mean, you can take it from the point of view of maybe adapting to individual needs, but I've been reading more about recently about Universal Design for Learning, UDL, and that kind of idea around if you make inclusive learning inclusive for certain groups of people, I think with this, it does become like stereotyping and assumption, doesn't it? And that's what you were saying. Not don't make assumptions about people. You know, everyone's different. Everyone's gloriously different. And it's about celebrating that. Not always seeing that as a negative side as well. So the idea is, isn't it, with UDL, that you take those architectural principles and think, well, you know, if you've got a ramp going into a building, that's not just more inclusive for the person with a wheelchair, but also inclusive for everybody. Yeah. So, you know, it's about thinking of the whole picture, I suppose.
It comes down to curriculum design. So it's about how you design for those in the margins. Yeah. And then you provide choice and flexibility so anybody can engage with that curriculum. And if you're tired, you might benefit from screen captions that day. You know, there's just having that flexibility and choice actually enables more people to access learning.
It's definitely about choice, isn't it? And giving options. And I think, you know, personally as a trainer and assessor, I think I like to think that we give people enough options, but there's always extra, I think, that we can do just to make sure, you know, it does take time. It takes time, you know, to prepare certain things, to make sure that the options are there, but it's worth it. And, you know, you reap the benefits, so that your learners reap the benefits, which is really important. So, yeah, I mean, Charlotte, from your point of view, what about workforce and having a diverse workforce?
And I think this is key for employers, and there are many benefits to a diverse workforce. And this can include increased productivity, more innovative solutions, because you've got a diverse range of thinking in terms of arriving at those solutions. And many businesses report on improved performance. The Equality Act is there. It does exist as a piece of legislation to protect individuals from discrimination in the workplace and also in wider society. And employers can enable access, I think, by talking to their employees. And for me, that is key to, you know, ask people what support they might need, have those conversations and be open about identifying barriers, and then work together to mitigate those barriers and enable people to access the tasks, the skills, what they need to do in work to be successful.
Brilliant. And Nicola, this is what you do at Inexclusion. So how can employers adapt to the needs of their workforce?
Absolutely. and make them aware of the Equality Act that Charlotte just mentioned, because it's surprising how many people don't know about their obligations under the Equality Act of 2010 in providing goods and services such as training. And, the way I look at it is, whilst the Equality Act is there, it still is very difficult to enforce it, because although it's a law in place, there is a lack of maybe political will and wind behind the sails of the Act. If you think of it, if in Wales we have Welsh language provision provided across a range of services, so for example, if I went to an event and I was a Welsh language user and there were no Welsh language provisions for me, then there is someone I can go to raise a complaint or raise my concerns around that lack of provision. Similarly, if I go to an event where food is served and I picked up food poisoning, unfortunately, for example, there's a food standards agency in Wales, or my local council has an environmental health department that I can go to and raise my complaint there. But whilst people can take an employer or a service provider to tribunal if they're unhappy with the provision provided to them alongside their disabilities, the onus is on individuals to take a case to tribunal. There's no organisation there that we could go to if we can't resolve that complaint in-house. And that is a big barrier in terms of enforcing the law, because, emotionally, the strain of having to take that to tribunal and produce all the evidence you may need, it is very, very difficult. So whilst we are protected by the law under the Equality Act, it is very, very difficult to enforce it. And, I think that can be quite a negative thing for people who don't receive the support they need. Look at it, raise the draft and so forth.
Yeah, I didn't realise that. That's really interesting. So individuals would have to take them to tribunal, is that correct? Yeah. So no support?
Yeah, so basically, if I was a learner today now and had a learning need that wasn't met, obviously I could try to address that in-house with the provider. If I wasn't satisfied with the outcome there, then the only place for me to go then would be to take the case to a tribunal and try to enforce my rights under the Equality Act of 2010, which places a legal obligation on service providers to provide reasonable adjustments because of my disability.
I mean, that's a lot to put on a person, isn't it? That's quite emotionally draining, I would imagine.
Absolutely. I've actually been in that situation myself, and I can tell you it's a very, very unpleasant place to be, and I think we need to find ways of, making inclusion more mainstream, that, people are not under pressure then to have to try to enforce the law.
Yeah, I'm just going to say, picking up on what Nicola has said,
Yeah,
I think a really important point is how training providers and employers are working together to provide that support. It needs to be holistic. There's a certain amount of support that can be offered in the workplace, and employers can access funding streams like Access to Work and look at a range of support that might suit their employee in the workplace, as well as then considering things like job carving. You might need to start with job profiling and identifying what skills and tasks might be needed within certain job roles. And then considering, if you've got people applying that have got different needs, is there an opportunity to job carve? So to carve that job role up and enable people to perform the parts of that role, so perhaps through a job share that best meet their needs, and really develop your workforce based on the productivity, based on that skill set. So that's where you look at the skills of your potential employees and how you can maximize productivity within your area. It may also be helpful for employers to work closely with training providers and assessors to minimize barriers, make reasonable adjustments at the earliest opportunity, looking at both the work that might need to be done through an apprenticeship program in terms of learning, as well as any adjustments in the workplace to best support that individual.
Brilliant. And I hadn't heard of the term job carving until we were researching this. So that's really interesting. You carve up the job according to strengths, I guess, and what they best suited to do.
And there's been a fair bit of work done within the sector, particularly around the supported shared apprenticeship scheme and working with the supported employment agencies that have brought that expertise in to support employers in looking at those options and enabling a more diverse workforce to support access to apprenticeships.
Right. So apprenticeships can be a good option then for learners with additional learning needs, would you say?
Yeah, and I think sometimes there can be a bit of a lack of awareness about what support is available from an employer's perspective, and also what support a training provider can offer. And so, making providers and employers aware of additional support needs at the earliest opportunity is key to getting that support in place.
So Charlotte, what are the barriers then in apprenticeships for those with additional learning needs?
In terms of barriers for learners, this may be related to essential skills levels, particularly if there are minimum industry requirements. So as part of a framework, it might stipulate an industry requirement, and it might be difficult, for example, for someone with dyslexia to reach that required level. But in many cases, there are opportunities for individuals with additional learning needs to consider concessions. So either to the literacy or numeracy components of the framework, there could be the option of reducing that level, again, to support. Sometimes there's a lack of awareness about apprenticeship opportunities and what support is available. And that could be a lack of parental support, the support not being fully accessed by the provider or the employer in supporting the individual.
And Nicola, from your point of view, what does a person need from their employer? How can employers adapt? So if we had an apprentice out in the workplace with certain needs, what can the employer do?
I think the best advice I can give is for anyone to just actively listen when someone presents with a learning support or discloses a disability. Sometimes having a disability doesn't necessarily mean they will need support with their learning, but just to actively listen and start to engage in open conversations, be open-minded. If they do disclose to you, either verbally or in writing on application form, then simply use this to dig a little deeper and say that you're really keen to make sure they have all the tools to succeed. So is there any support that you can give them? Really, really, the most important thing I can say is to actively listen to what they say. If you're not sure about how to meet their needs, then don't worry. It's okay to say, okay, leave this with me, I need to do a bit of research, or speak to someone else in the organisation and get back to you. That's no big deal. We mustn't be scared. We've got to just ask the right questions and be open-minded, And I think it's about being prepared to be flexible and maybe do things differently to what you are doing at the moment, And from my experience, and I'm sure Charlotte can agree with me on this, it's actually much easier than we think to meet the needs of learners who need adjustments. Very often they only need very, very small adjustments to open up a whole wide world of opportunities for them, So I think the key to what I'm saying is be open-minded, think laterally rather than through a tunnel vision, And don't forget, there are lots. So like Charlotte said, you've got resources like Access to Work and other financial incentives that can help you on this journey if there are financial costs involved with making adjustments. And of course, disability awareness training can help too. Because again, from my experience, a lot of the time, people are unsure about meeting these because they don't have the knowledge or the confidence. More than anything, it's not that they don't want to do it, but they don't know how to do it, So, yes, so I think, it's all about being open-minded, actively listen, and it's okay to learn as you go along.
Yeah, I think that's key. And from an assessor perspective, the best thing that you can do is look at the person that's in front of you. And apprenticeships is really great for the fact that, there is that assessor that meets with the learner generally on a one-to-one basis to do reviews. And as part of that, you can identify, okay, maybe, a monthly meeting is going to be too much and the information needs to be broken down. So do we do for this learner, perhaps a meeting every fortnight, but it's shorter and more concise so that you're able to be more productive? The learner is going to join a workshop perhaps, and there's other learners there. Could you provide some key vocabulary or pre-teaching materials ahead of the session. So if someone's got, cognition and learning needs, where they might take a bit of time to need to keep pace with the class, actually, if they've had time to go over the vocabulary beforehand, and then they've had chance to just be aware of what the key themes are going to be in that session, they might then be able to keep pace with that group more easily. They might need some check-ins after and, knowledge checks, and you can be flexible about how you present information to learners. Can you present it in a range of formats? You don't have to present everything to everyone in the same way, but actually if you design it so that it's available to everyone, people can engage in that. And I think we said at the start, didn't we, about how important that choice and flexibility is. And for me, it's key in terms of how do we enable people to demonstrate their knowledge and skills in a way that best meets their needs. And I understand that, some frameworks might have controlled assessments, and then we do have exam access arrangements and other reasonable adjustments that can be put in place. And we have to follow the JCQ guidance there. And yes, we might be gearing somebody up to that controlled assessment. But if they're going to find that difficult, and that's the only way that we check their knowledge throughout their apprenticeship, we're not building their confidence in their knowledge and skills to enable them and empower them to feel confident to work through those barriers in an exam.
Good point. And I want to pick up on what you said about just talk to the learner in front of you, because when we're teaching about how to train, how to teach, people say to me, but Ros, if I have a dyslexic learner, obviously I've got to use coloured overlays with them. It's like, well, maybe not, speak to them. What works for them? Because it may be that doesn't work for them. They use something else. What works for them? Don't make
and try it out.
And try it out.
So there's loads of free assistive technology tools. It's built into Microsoft, into Word. There's magnifiers, screen magnifiers. There's text to speech dictation software. So there's lots of different tools that could be used to engage someone.
Whatever
and it
works
might
for them,
be,
isn't it?
and it might be, particularly if it's an adult learner that's returning to education as part of their career, they might not have been in learning for a while and they might not know what's going to work. So give them a range of options and explore it together and have a conversation about what's worked well and what hasn't worked so well, and take that person-centered approach in, okay, what can we try next? And all providers will have staff that can support with additional learning needs. So, what we'd expect assessors to do is be making those reasonable adjustments, listening, like Nicola said, having those conversations, trying things out. And then if there are barriers, making referrals into those teams where they can look at, do we need any external support? Is there anything else that's needed, like access to work support or, additional learning provision that might be in addition to what's already in place?
Brilliant. And Anne, actually, I'm going to pick on you, Anne. What your experiences, how do you sort of make sure that everything's inclusive for the learners you have?
Yeah, I believe it's exactly what you've just been saying, to be honest, Charlotte and Nicola. It's very much about having that person-centered approach and talking to the learner, not making assumptions about what people need. Like you say, the dyslexic example, straight to coloured overlays. I hear that quite a lot.
Straight. There are other ways.
And not be afraid to try different things out. Yeah, that's so key. And sometimes it can be, like you say, something really simple. It doesn't have to necessarily anything really expensive, or sometimes you do need special equipment, but sometimes it's really simple little things that can really make all the difference. And not just maybe just that person, but to everybody. It's a really good practice for everybody to know maybe about speech to text. That can be useful for anyone. But get back to UDL, So,
well, UDL, I mean, what you were saying there, Charlotte, it's all about options, in the way we present information to them, the way they present information to us. It's just giving them choices, isn't it?
Yes. And then thinking about different scaffolds and support. So you might have your curriculum, you might generally teach something in a certain way or, deliver it in a certain way, but then having those things to hand that can be available to every learner. Only the learners that really need it might take up the option of using it, but you're being inclusive in your approach, that it's just through design that you're trying to meet everybody's needs without anyone having to ask for something different.
Exactly. Now, back in the day when I first started at a training provider that we both used to work at, back in those days, it was very much about, right, okay, let's do the learning styles questionnaire, let's do all the enrollment questions, and then we'd ignore all of the results and just give them a big, massive small text-based manual, hope they coped with it. I think we've come a long way in giving people choices, because now there's so many things like online. You can get natural readers, so you can upload a document and it'll be read out in a natural UK or American or whatever
Welsh
nationality, even Welsh, which is amazing, voice, and it's not just for those with additional learning needs, it's for those that perhaps just like listening to stuff and it goes in better for them, like listening to a podcast. We don't all learn the same way, do we?
No, and I think it is key what you said, and it goes back to Nicola's point about listening. So if we're going to ask questions, if we're going to gather information, then we need to listen to what learners are telling us. And quite often, a learner, by the time they get to apprenticeship, has spent quite a lot of time in education and quite a lot of time working out what does work for them and what's been successful and what hasn't been successful. And actually, by the time that they're on an apprenticeship, we want to take that knowledge and support them to be successful without that trial and error if they're already aware.
Definitely. I also think from our point of view as assessors and tutors that we've got to be prepared to be really flexible. If we like teaching in a certain way, doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's going to be able to learn that way. So we've got to be really flexible. And as long as we're willing and, able to do that, fantastic.
Yes, because you often tend to teach, don't you, in the way that you've been taught, preferences. You often default to that. And it's a really good challenge, I think, for a lot of my trainee teachers and learners and tutors and assessors to kind of push themselves a little bit and try different things out.
Yeah. Because myself, I'm a very visual learner, if you like, if you believe in learning styles. Mm-hmm. That's another podcast. But, I always teach, I think, in a very visual way. But then is that for everyone? Maybe not. So I've made sure that now all my materials are audio based as well. Yeah, it takes a little bit more time, but now I'm getting people, they don't have to come to me and say, Ros, can you turn that into a podcast for me? Because it's already there. So it takes away that maybe fear or embarrassment. But back in the day, it was very much, so with our big manuals, with very small text, if there was somebody with a visual impairment, we would blow it up to 200% on the photocopier and take it over to them in their seat and go, look, this is for you. And, not discreet at all. And I would hope that we've changed in the way that we do that now.
Yeah, I would hope that we have. And I think the key thing is we've talked about, that teaching element, but it comes to assessment as well. So actually in assessment, and apprenticeships is a great opportunity for this. And like we said, there are some assessments that are standardized and have to take place in a certain way. But for many of the assessment criteria within apprenticeship frameworks, lots of it is done with the employer, sort of in the workplace. So where there are knowledge components, sometimes somebody with a learning need might need to contextualize it. So they'll be able to do the practical tasks of their role really successfully. And if you ask them to explain what they're doing and use questioning to draw out some of that knowledge criteria, they might not need to sit down if they've got dyslexia and write an assignment, or they might be able to have a professional discussion with you after, but contextualize it based on the work tasks that you've just observed.
Yes, and use that range of methods makes that more robust then, doesn't it? And you're more confident that the learner understands and can demonstrate those skills as well.
I'm just going to say, could I just pick up on what you're talking about? How training providers have changed over the years. It's really good to hear this because I was a careers advisor back at the turn of the century, shows my age. And I actually left the career service in 2012, and I work closely with training providers when they have practices like you're talking about, back in the day. And, that was often an issue for my clients, when they were maybe very good at a practical task, but not so good at doing the form filling to be able to achieve their NVQ, And my role then was to influence training providers to be flexible in the way they assess my clients, And I like to think that I had a hand in getting them to change their practices, but that was down to my individual effort, if you like. But it's nice to see now more on a general scale that training providers are beginning to, work in a far more open-minded, individualized and flexible way that suits individual learners. So that's a really, really positive development that I'm really happy to hear about.
I definitely think it's improved so much since the turn of the century, which is when I started as well in training. But I think one of the issues is with a lot of staff, a lot of tutors and assessors, that sometimes maybe they just don't know how to start the conversation with learners, and often find it challenging to speak with learners about their disability because they just don't want to offend them, and you just, I don't know how to say it. I won't say anything. So, Nicola, do you have any tips for that, about how we approach that sort of conversation?
Right. I would say don't panic. That's the best advice I can give is don't panic. Again, listen to what that person in front of you is saying. Actively listen, relate back to them and make sure you understand what they're telling you and how it may affect their learning. And if you don't have that information offhand, to give it back to them straight away, say, look, I'll take this away, I'll do a bit of research, but I'll get back to you. Show them respect and understanding, saying, look, we want to support you as much as we can to achieve your learning outcomes. And, it's okay if you don't have all the answers. You can't be experts in everything, but it's about just listening, not panicking, going away, getting that information, and then working with that person one-to-one on coming up with, a way forward. And like Charlotte said, it's trying things and finding out if they work or not. And if they don't work initially, that's okay. Then you try something else. I think sometimes people put too much pressure on themselves about getting it right because they're worried about offending people or getting it wrong. Sometimes we need to be kind to ourselves and, realize we're humans and we're all learning. And that's absolutely okay.
Yeah, I'd agree. And just to add to what Nicola has said, one of the biggest things that I've learned throughout my sort of 20-year career has been to observe what is in front of you. So like listening, like having the conversations, and then observe how your learner responds.
Yeah.
And then you can adapt what you're doing and refine it as you get to know each other. And that's okay to be making those refinements because it's a learning process for you both. And I think in terms of looking at those adjustments, don't assume that someone with dyslexia don't look at dyslexia and say, right, someone with dyslexia must have these adjustments.
Isn't it? Exactly.
Because actually what you might find is look at the person that's in front of you, look at a whole range of reasonable adjustments and ways of working, and you might go, oh, actually, borrowing some of those strategies from ADHD around organisation and planning might help my learner. I've recognised that there's some difficulty with organisation and planning. So can I provide some scaffolded writing frame to help my learner organise? And once they've done that, they'll be fine with the task that they need to get on with. I break information down. Can I support with technology tools? And so I think it is about being creative and not assuming that one approach is going to work for everyone, but actually you might work with one individual and try something and see another person with a completely different range of needs, but actually that strategy might also support them. So have that flexible approach.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Can I just add, from a personal perspective, as someone living with a lifelong disability, the amount of people that tell me what I need when I present to them with my needs. So if I introduce myself, say, I've got a hearing impairment, people automatically know what I need,
Right.
They start using exaggerated lip movements, or they tell me that it's okay because their man is deaf. A lot of it is well intended, but the impact it has on me is that it's telling me that people are not listening to me, and that's exactly what we should be doing to all our learners. We should be listening to them. And it is quite interesting because, people do think they are helping you with their comments, but actually, they're a million miles away from where they need to be, So, yes, I think we can all agree that the biggest thing that we can offer to anyone is to listen to that person in front of us, not make assumptions about them, let them tell us their story, what their needs are, and then respond to it. And like Charlotte said, it's the start of a journey where you were both learning, and that's
Yeah.
absolutely fine, but we are going in the right direction, and that's all we can really hope to achieve.
Definitely. And I think if we've got a good rapport with our learners, which is something that we all try to do, then that will aid the conversation, isn't it? Just wants to finish, Charlotte, with talking around some support that's available out there.
Yeah, there is support available for some frameworks, as we said, where learners might find the level of essential skills for literacy and numeracy or numeracy a challenge because of their disability, where there aren't those industry requirements and where somebody meets the eligibility criteria for essential skills concessions. That is one option to explore if the literacy and numeracy components are a barrier. And then employers can also utilise, as we've said, access to work funding. And this is an employment support programme that can help with things like equipment, communication support with travel, specialist assistive technology, which will support someone in the workplace, but also with their learning. So I think it is about looking at what support is available holistically when someone is an apprentice learner, because they're an employed adult as well as a learner. And it's making sure that all of the available support is working holistically and in a person-centred way to enable that person to be successful.
It's a massive subject, isn't it? And there's loads of information out there. So at Panda, we're working currently with Nicola to bring everyone a new training session, which is disability awareness for trainers and assessors and educators. So if you want to find out more about this topic and sort of how to support your learners and, perhaps employers, please come along. That will be coming out soon on all of our socials. So look, thank you both for talking to us today. You're both really passionate about this, obviously. And I think we are as well, in our capacity. We always try to make sure that learners have got options. But if nothing else, that they can come to us and tell us. If we're getting it wrong, they're not afraid to say, maybe this would be a better approach. And that's all about communication, isn't it? So, Nicola, Charlotte, thank you both. It's been really enlightening I've learned quite a lot, especially about job carving. Never heard of that before, so thank you. There will be, you guys have given us some links to websites and blogs that you find really helpful. So we'll put those out on our socials. And if you're watching this on YouTube, watching a podcast, but you can watch us on YouTube. We'll put all the links in the description and you can catch up with that. So thank you both. In our next podcast, we're going from this subject around inclusion to basically whether the robots are taken over. So we'll be talking to Lisa Beecham, nothing if not diverse, our subject on our podcast. So in the next podcast, we'll be talking to Lisa Beecham, who's digital consultant at Educate Training here in South Wales, and Constance Henry from Gower College, all about generative AI. So are those robots trying to take our jobs and take over, or can they actually help us in our roles as educators? So look forward to that one. In the meantime, follow us on all the socials to keep up with the news and our next podcast, and we'll see you all next time. Thanks, everyone.